Welcome to Redirect Immigration Law and Perspectives. I'm Stephen Robbins. I took out the weekly thing, Matthew.
Oh, why?
We're getting too many letters. You can't call it weekly.
Has the FCC contacted us?
Yes. I'm here with Matthew Archambault, fellow immigration attorney out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Aaron Reichlin-Melnick. Aaron is a friend of the show. He's been on many times. Aaron, how are you doing these days?
Oh, good. Looking forward to the long holiday weekend and another month, unfortunately, of having to deal with border data issues, because that's coming in a week or two.
Oh, nice. Well, we wanted to talk about the border. It's been a while, actually. And I talked about this on the show a couple months ago. After the election, there was just all of this border stuff. And it was a lot of sort of virtue signaling from the right based on false information. And I just couldn't bring myself to engage like I used to. I was sort of, I think, exhausted by the whole thing. How do you overcome that sort of sense, or maybe you don't feel it, but that sense of like despair and repeating the same things over and over again?
That's a great question. You know, in some ways, it's more that it's not like we're going down the exact same rabbit hole. It's that we're going down the next door neighbor to the rabbit hole, and it's a slightly different rabbit hole.
Right.
In other ways, I am, as always, fueled by the rage of someone being wrong on the internet and my desire to correct that information. It's like the XKCD cartoon here. You know, I'm not going to bed because someone's wrong on the internet, and it's my job to go out there and fix it.
Right.
Well, I see your Twitter feed, which people should follow, which you do try a lot to correct all the misinformation, but you know they don't care, right? I mean, that's what drives me crazy. It's like, you can show graphs from like, hey, look, in 2019, there was actually more, right? So we're less than 2019, and Trump was president then. They don't even engage it. They just ignore it completely. And I'm sure that's not frustrating at all, right?
Surprisingly not, actually, because my philosophy for all of this has always been, you can't convince most people. And as I'm sure you'll know, if you get into an argument on the internet, the chance of you actually convincing the other person that they're wrong is about 0%. So you always aim your audience at the people who you're not arguing with. That's why, I'm always pretty polite. You know, you don't want to be that guy who's branded as the one just sort of yelling crankily at people. And B, especially these days,
You want a Glenn Greenwald, is what you're saying.
Right. You never want to be the Glenn Greenwald of an argument. And sort of the other thing is, my goal with a lot of this data stuff is not to convince the politician who likely doesn't understand the issue and is reading off of a talking points document. You know, my goal is to convince the reporter who follows me to understand what the truth is, to convince the average person, and to sort of help explain things. So, I'm not going to convince Lauren Boebert that she's wrong about the border, because that would be a fool's errand. I'm trying to convince the reporter who wants to know whether the number she's using is right to put it in a story and to provide that context.
I will say also, as somebody who once suffered from a great deal of cognitive dissonance, you never know. I might get in trouble with my family for talking about this, but there's this idea in the ex-Mormon community of having a shelf where you put your doubts and you put like the information that is not super compatible with your worldview. You just sort of put it over there. People describe the thing that broke their shelf, the piece of information or the moment when they sort of realize like, maybe this whole paradigm is not real or not true. And so even though I'm, as I described earlier, sort of frustrated with this dynamic that you're describing, I do think it's also true that, yes, it's a small number of people and it doesn't happen very often, but there are these watershed moments for people. And it's important to put true information out there and let people do with it what they will.
Yeah.
Now, before we get into exactly what's going on at the border, our big brain former president was down at the border just yesterday, in fact. And here's what he had to say. I want to play this. Aaron, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's...
No, I make it my business not to watch things that the former president says as a matter of course. So I'm bracing myself for this one.
Well, if you're looking for something that would really change the dynamic? I know we talk about immigration as involving like people fleeing certain murder and global climate change making previously habitable regions uninhabitable and these major things. But really, the solution is sitting right in front of us.
The Rolling Stones sang about it.
Right.
So let's hear it.
Thing about, and we have to get that painted now. They have to paint it.
He's talking about the wall.
They don't paint it, bad things are happening. I'm looking, and it has to be painted. And the best color to paint it is black. Because if you paint it black, it's so hot, nobody can even try to climb it. Not that they're successful anyway. Those are anti-climb panels on top, which I didn't want to do, but they said, sir, we need them, and they are great protection. It's the exact wall. We worked with the governor on this. It's the exact wall that Border Patrol, ICE, and all of the professionals wanted, the sheriffs. I said, I didn't want to give them any choice. Let's build it right and do it right. So what happened is all of these things came together. We produced the safest, best border we've ever had. And now in a short period of time, it was over. I was going to say.
Yeah. So in a short period of time, things have really gone sideways. And Aaron,
I mean, you have to paint it black.
Yeah.
So people won't climb it, though they don't climb it now anyways, because you can't climb it. But if you paint it black,
then people wouldn't even.
They won't climb the wall. They won't climb right now. So
my favorite thing about those climbing plates that he mentioned is, so for those who haven't seen these, at the top of this 30-foot bollard wall fence, you've got a large iron sheet, essentially like 15 feet long, welded across all of the various steel bollards. And those are the anti-climb plates because the idea is it's not that hard to actually climb up one of the steel columns. But once you get to the plate, it's about 3 feet high and you don't have any handholds, and therefore it's a lot harder to get over that last little bit. But the thing about welding a giant steel plate to like 15 bollards in a row is if you go to Home Depot, you get a little angle grinder for $60 or something, and you just saw the bottom of these bollards. Now, because they're welded at the top, that means you could just saw the bottom and just kind of casually push the bollard out of the way and step through the wall.
Now listen.
And I've seen videos of this, and the cartels, they literally just saw through the darn thing, push the bollard aside, just walk through, and then like push it back. And they have to repair this along the border. There are people cutting these walls every single day. And so they have to do repair jobs on the walls constantly to re-weld it because congratulations, all you've done is made it even easier to cut through the border wall than it was before.
Now, only a fool would get a grinder that you're going to throw into the desert from Home Depot when you could get it at Harbor Freight. That's what I'm going to say, first of all. But the problems you're describing are problems that relate to an unpainted wall, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, if it was black.
The anti-cutting paint is the real important one. They make it with, I think it's unobtainium.
Yeah, and if it's black, it's going to be too hot to cut. That's
too hot.
The thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just melt the angle grinder.
Because like regular steel in the desert, not that hot.
No.
But when you...
Weirdly, there's something to do with steel, rust. When you put rust in a desert, it actually gets colder.
Is that true?
Yeah, no, it's just science. That border wall, when you go up to it right now, if you don't paint it, people actually use it as a form of air conditioning. They just lean up against that metal.
Right. I see what you're saying. You're being sarcastic. Okay.
Yeah.
Metal in the desert, not that hot. But once you paint it, that's when it... This reminds me in college, I had this roommate who was not a stoner, by the way, but he would come up with these really good ideas. Like one time he said, they should make a battery that's like really small, but also really powerful. And also it should last a long time. And he was really feeling like
no one ever thought of that, right?
Yeah, he was making a real breakthrough here. Or when there were those fires in the oil fields in Iraq, he would say they should make like a giant blanket that's fireproof and then drop it on the fire and the fire would go out. And that guy is basically like the former president now. Anyways, good for him, just coming back out of retirement and sharing these ideas for free. It's amazing. Now, Aaron.
Do you know they actually did paint some of the wall black?
Oh.
Like, that's not completely thing that made up. He forced them to do that. And I think it was at a cost of like several $1 million a mile in paint. And those sections that he painted black are now way more expensive to maintain because rather than having unpainted steel columns, now you have to touch up the paint every year because, paint doesn't do that well when it's baking under the sun, 12 hours a day.
Right.
Why don't we just make black steel?
Yeah.
Huh?
Now
let's just make the whole thing out of carbon fiber. That's already black. So
you guys have some really good ideas.
What if we just have a big fire pit? Lava.
He did propose a moat with alligators in it, allegedly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
I'll be honest. A moat would make more sense than painting the thing black. But, to his
and
credit...
I've heard there's a big river that one might call a moat.
Right. Griff Jenkins was down there just the other day. To his credit, to the former president's credit, the wall that they built is see-through, which is really important because of the drugs that they catapult over the wall. And so now if you're on the U.S. side and there's like a 10-pound brick of meth flying over the wall, you can kind of see it coming and you can dodge it. So that's good. Now, listen, Aaron, what are the biggest lies and misconceptions? 4th of July weekend, we're going to be around family. This is sort of like Thanksgiving light, right? We got to be ready for when the uncle casually mentions Joe Biden's open border illegals extravaganza. So what are the biggest lies being told right now about the situation at the border?
I think you mentioned the first and the biggest, which is that the border is open. The border is in no way, shape, or form open right now. And in order to say that, we have to say, what does it mean to have an open border? Well, an open border would be one in which a person could just come across the border and be welcomed in and have absolutely no negative things happening to them. That is not what is happening right now, because what is happening right now is that roughly 2/3 of all people who are apprehended crossing the border are immediately expelled under a public health policy that the Trump administration put in place last year, known as Title 42, that the Biden administration has kept in place. So 2 out of 3 people who the Border Patrol encounter are quickly either sent back to Mexico or stuck on a plane and deported to their home countries. That is not an open border. And then I would say major myth number 2 is that we are seeing historic record levels of migration at the border with more people coming than we have seen in 20 years. That is the harder myth to debunk, but it's also not true.
Everyone in Central America was watching the election and the debates, and they heard Joe Biden say that he's for open borders. So they started packing their bags, and now you reap what you sow, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would describe that as 100% historically accurate about what's actually going on at the border. We all remember that moment during the primary debates and on stage versus Trump where Joe Biden turned to the camera and he said, "Yo quiero que todos vengan."
Right.
And I want everyone to come. That is, of course, the clip seen around the world. But, in reality, the Biden administration has been crystal clear, since day one. And since, in fact, before he even took office, Joe Biden and the people in the Biden administration have been saying their big message is don't come. They said that during the transition period. The White House press secretary said it. Joe Biden himself, in his very first public press conference after becoming president, said if he could expel every family arriving at the border, he would. And so the idea that the Biden administration is opening its arms wide and telling everybody to come to the border is like, it's a right-wing fever dream. And the problem is, as we mentioned earlier here, those who oppose immigrants started sowing the ground with misinformation months before he took office. And in fact, even before the election, you had the CBP commissioner, senior official performing the duties of the CBP commissioner, Mark Morgan, who now works for an anti-immigrant hate group, saying...
Hold up. He's always worked for an anti-immigrant hate group, CBP. Continue.
Good point.
Well, yeah, and so now it's a more official one, FAIR, which is founded by a white supremacist of 20, 30 years ago. And he was saying before the election, if Joe Biden comes, we're going to see 5 million people coming because the borders will be open. And of course, after Joe Biden was elected, he kept saying, everything that's going to happen, we're going to have 5 million people coming to the border. Here's the reality. Donald Trump said at that press conference, before he left, we had the best border. Well, border apprehensions began spiking in spring of 2020, more than half a year before the election even occurred. In April and May, apprehensions began spiking because of Title 42, this pandemic policy. And there's a couple reasons for that. And the main reason is that when we talk about these Title 42 and we talk about people being expelled, we need to explain there's a really weird difference between being expelled and being deported. On a practical level, they are exactly the same thing. A government official takes an immigrant and pushes them into another country or puts them on a plane and sends them to a country. That's a deportation. I don't care what you call it. You are being taken from the United States and sent to another country. But as a legal matter, an expulsion is like a nullity. It's nothing. It is literally a pure act of power. The government saying, we're just sending you another country. They don't issue you a deportation order. They don't sign any formal paperwork saying you have been deported. It's just literally a government official, a Border Patrol agent, an ICE officer sending you to another country. And the important thing is, without that legal determination that someone's been deported, it effectively means the only consequence is the deportation itself. And because Mexico agreed to take the deportations/expulsions of Mexicans and most Central Americans, that actually means that for people who are not trying to seek asylum, those who are actually trying to sneak past the Border Patrol, or economic migrants, or another way I like to say, people just looking for a better life like our ancestors, those people, the only consequence for crossing the border is the danger of the journey itself and the danger of interacting with the cartels as they cross, which is a very significant danger. And I don't want to underplay that because many people die crossing the border. But from the US government, for these people, it's like there's no consequences. You can cross the border 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, each time being caught by the Border Patrol and then sent back to Mexico, where you can just walk around and give it another try the next day. And that, under Title 42, set off the biggest spike in people coming to the border that we have seen in 15 to 20 years. And that began more than a year ago in the last months of the Trump administration. By September of 2020, we were already seeing the highest numbers of apprehensions in 15 years. And that spike is the single biggest thing driving the headlines. When you actually look at families, there was a minor sort of quote unquote Biden effect after he took office, because guess what? Fox News and others yelling that the borders are now open, that message filtered back to some people. But the reality is that the number of families who came to the border in February and March and April is less than half of the number who came in 2019. And the number who actually got in, the ones who were not expelled immediately under Title 42, is less than a third of the families who got in 2019.
So, Aaron, shouldn't we clarify, if people aren't catching on, that when you talk about apprehensions, so let's say today at one Border Patrol station, they apprehend 500 people and they expel them right back. And then the next day they apprehend another 500 people. That could be actually the same 500 people. So when they talk about all these apprehensions, people use that like, look at all these people, but a lot of them are exactly the same people. Isn't that how it's working?
That's exactly right. And in fact, in 2019, 6.7% of people who were apprehended had been apprehended at least once in the previous 12 months. So that means 6.7% of people who were apprehended in 2019 were on their second try. In 2020, after Title 42 went into effect, 26% of people for the year were on their second try. And fiscal year 21, year to date, that is from October through May, 40% of people who are being apprehended are on their at minimum second try. And so what that means is that in May 2019, around 140,000 people, 144,000 people were apprehended. But that actually worked out to the number of unique people crossing who was on their very first try showing up at the border was 135,000. In May 2021, 180,000 people encountered, not all apprehended. The number of unique people was actually 111,000, 25,000 less than in 2019. Because so many people, because of Title 42, are crossing the border multiple times. So when you actually look at the number of people coming to the border, not just the number of apprehensions. Fewer people are coming now than came in 2019, even though apprehensions are much higher than 2019 because of Title 42 leading to people being able to cross the border multiple times.
So historically, in my clients, the older clients who came in, years ago, might have 3, 4, 5 entries, or at least 3, 4, 5 attempted entries before they were successful. And, none of them were removal orders. They were just kind of expelled back. But in more recent years, it's very uncommon to have someone that has multiple entries that were not encountered by Border Patrol. And when they were encountered by Border Patrol, they would have been given what they call an expedited order removal, which can really mess up a person's immigration journey here in the US if you enter after you've been ordered removed. So why aren't they just giving people expedited orders of removal? Is that something to do with Title 42?
Yeah, so the idea with Title 42 was to avoid even that process. And
because that opens the door to asylum.
Yeah, so when it was put in place, expedited removal has protections involved with it. You can't order someone removed through expedited removal unless you give them a chance to seek asylum. So if you want
to... in theory.
In theory, that's right. There are many people who go through that process who are denied that right to seek asylum in violation of the law. But as a theoretical matter, expedited removal has these protections. But Title 42, the idea with that was, let's give the Trump administration, DHS, the most generous interpretation of their beliefs on Title 42 as we can. And I like to say, as a thought experiment, trust everything that the government says for once and evaluate what's the rational reason one could do this policy. Well, when the pandemic hit, the Title 42 policy, which was supposedly designed to stop people from being held in Border Patrol stations, where theoretically they could spread COVID between each other. And Title 42, which was not expedited removal, allowed people to essentially do all that processing outdoors, not in a crowded Border Patrol station, and effectively never have to detain people. In some places along the border, they could apprehend you and have you back in Mexico in 2 hours. If they caught you in Tucson, you'd be taken to a Border Patrol station, fingerprinted outside, and then driven in a bus. Unfortunately, again, that's not a great way to stop you from getting COVID by shoving everybody on the bus together, but they did it anyway. Taken in a bus back to the port of entry and shoved back there. And so the idea then was to reduce the spread of COVID by not holding people in so-called congregate settings. Now, of course, public health experts have said there are many other ways to deal with this. You could come up with ways to quarantine people. You could just test people to see if they had COVID. And certainly by now, when we have vaccines, when we have rapid testing, when we have the ability to know whether someone's got COVID and to put them in a quarantine setting, the idea that Title 42 is still necessary is very, very not believable. And public health experts, which I'm not, say Title 42 wasn't necessary then, and it's definitely not necessary now.
Right.
But that was the idea. That's why they weren't putting people through these deportation orders, theoretically, was get them out of these congregate settings. If you give the government full credit for not lying about their rationales, when I will note about that, there are multiple news reports that say Stephen Miller and Chad Wolf and the White House came up with this policy and not the scientists at the CDC.
What? So
unbelievable. I don't believe that.
In other words, if I'm a Haitian or I'm a Mexican fleeing some sort of persecution, traditionally, if I'm apprehended at the border, Border Patrol can start a expedited removal or formal legal deportation process, but I have this very small, limited, sometimes ignored right to say, wait a minute, I'm afraid to go back. I might be tortured. I might be persecuted. And then there's a process for that. And that could involve detention. But ironically, those people aren't always detained. I've seen plenty of cases of people apprehended in the sort of traditional way who were just issued a notice to appear and released immediately, because I'm sure the Border Patrol officer was like at the end of his shift or whatever. So they designed Title 42 essentially to pull the rug out from under these people. On the one hand, they're not technically deported. I mean, it's a form versus substance question, right? They are removed, but they're not legally deported. But the important thing is that they don't get any chance to claim persecution, to claim fear of torture. They're just returned. And this still exists.
That's right. There are some exceptions now to Title 42. So I will say this about Title 42. It is illegal. We have been saying this since the beginning, and the ACLU and everyone who has brought lawsuits against Title 42 has won those lawsuits.
Well, wait, Aaron, can we talk about that? Have they? I mean, what's the ACLU doing? Because every time I check, they're suspending their lawsuit down in California to talk to the Biden administration in good faith. So are they winning? Am I missing something? Because it seems to me that they're kind of giving the Biden administration probably a lot more latitude than they would have given the Trump administration.
So I don't want to comment too much on the ACLU's litigation strategy on this, but I will say that the reason that the Biden administration is even talking to them is because the legal issues are so clear. And the ACLU...
Well, if the legal issues are so clear, why aren't they pushing it? Because it's not, and I don't mean to jump on you, but it pisses me off that the ACLU seems to be kind of soft-gloving this one. And I don't think they'd be soft-gloving it with the Trump administration. I don't even know if that's a really term, soft-gloving, but, whatever, kid gloves or whatnot.
They're totally soft-loving it. I mean...
Sorry, Aaron.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And the ACLU is at their negotiations. And the thing is, I will just say this about Title 42. Title 42 operates in a weird space where every judge to have looked at the issue so far has said Title 42. So when we say Title 42, we're referring to U.S. Code Volume 42, Section 265, 42 U.S.C. 265. And that is a public health law that was originally passed in its earliest form in the late 19th century and was sort of updated in the 60s. But this is an over a century old public health law that says the CDC director, it actually says, the head of HHS, but the CDC director now, under various reasons, has the power to, quote, suspend the introduction of persons from a country with an infectious disease. Now, everyone to have looked at this historically has said suspend the introduction refers to stopping people from entering, because you are being introduced into the country. And this is a law that was passed before even the concept of illegal immigration existed in its original form. And so the historical record is pretty clear that this law was about stopping steamships or later planes and trains and buses and stuff, things that come to ports of entry and say, we would like to come in. The US government now suddenly, more than 100 years after this law had been passed, the Trump administration and now the Biden administration has said, actually, what this law allows us to do magically is to take people who are already on US soil and deport them. And crazily, they have said, this is part of the Title 42 order. If they wanted to do this to US citizens, they could. They have just chosen not to as a policy matter. So that should scare people because Title 42, the Trump administration was said, we have this power to, if we wanted, deport US citizens who have already entered the US if we think that they're going to go further into the US and spread a virus. But we're just choosing not to. We're instead only going to aim this at basically people seeking asylum and people crossing the border. We are going to allow in millions of people a month at the ports of entry. We're going to allow any US citizen to come in, but everyone else, no. And so that is a scary proposition that the US government is essentially saying, we think that there is a law that lets us deport US citizens. They're not doing it to US citizens, with the exception of, I will note, they have expelled US citizen babies that were born on the US soil to migrant mothers who crossed the border, were apprehended, went into labor, and gave birth on the US soil. And in multiple occasions, they have taken those mothers and their babies and expelled them back to Mexico. So that is a scary, scary power. And that is why I should say the government's arguments have fared very poorly in court. Even a Trump-appointed judge was like, no, this is definitely not allowed. And last November, a federal court said, What's also definitely not allowed is for you to expel unaccompanied children.
Mm-hmm.
That's another one of these myths that Biden changed how unaccompanied children were treated at the border. It is true he changed the policy. He formally exempted unaccompanied children because 3 ultra-conservative judges on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeal, Naomi Rao, Jeffrey Katsas, and I'm blanking on the third one, but the most ultra-conservative of the D.C. Circuit Appeals judges that Trump appointed, they temporarily stayed that court order from November on January 29th, 9 days into the Biden presidency. And the Biden administration at that point was faced with a really difficult choice. Do you keep fighting this case in court and go back to expelling unaccompanied children? Restart the process of expelling unaccompanied children that had been blocked in November, or do you formally exempt unaccompanied children and keep allowing them in? And they made the right decision. They said, we are not going to go back to the practice of expelling unaccompanied children. But that policy change has been, for a very long time, falsely claimed in the media that Joe Biden was the one who started the practice of not expelling unaccompanied children. That is not the case. What he did was effectively choose not to go back.
Right.
It's a pet peeve of mine. It's a distinction without a difference, but I do think it matters that it was a decision not to restart expulsions versus a decision to stop expelling unaccompanied children.
Yeah, I mean, I know for the ACLU, if you're listening, I know when I have like a really strong litigation stance and I know I'm going to win and I have like the stronger upper hand, I always like to pause the litigation to see if the other side will just agree with me instead of having the judge rule in my favor. So kudos to them. And you know what? They're a lot smarter than I am, so I'm sure I'm missing something.
I mean, I think what you're missing is that there is a lot of value in creating a sense of order. And I think that there's a lot of political issues involved with this in a way that I think a lot of people don't necessarily want there to be. But
meaning they want to get positions in the administration?
No. I mean, as a matter of that's not what I meant at all, and I'm definitely not. Yeah, but I don't think that's true. I really don't think that's true either. I think the key there is that
there are thousands of people every day.
Yeah,
who are being not inconvenienced. There are people dying, and that's what pisses me off. We're not talking about some H-1B extension, the EB-5. Is it 500 or 750 or 900,000? We're talking about people at the border who are being expelled to death. And I'm not jumping on Aaron, but he's here.
That's fair. Right.
So, I mean, maybe someday someone from the ACLU would come on, but we don't have time to invite anybody. So,
yeah. And they also can't talk about it because it's still in settlement negotiations.
Right.
So anyways.
Let me go back real quick to the COVID. Did you just kick a trash can?
I threw something away.
Oh, okay.
My dignity.
The COVID thing is hilarious because I think I mentioned this before. New Zealand really smashed the virus and they did take some harsh immigration measures and really, I think, closed down the country, but to an end, and they saved a lot of lives, I think. But the idea that the Trump administration, which for months denied that the virus was a big deal, called it the China virus. Trump made a big deal about not wearing a mask everywhere he went. They were so defiant about the science of the virus in ways that really cost many lives. The fact that the one area that they, suddenly were so concerned about the spread was poor and impoverished asylum seekers, I think really gives away the game.
And when it was implemented, we had more of a problem than Mexico did, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
At the time, the United States was the hotbed of COVID. And I think another thing that people often don't get is they think that somehow the border was shut. The U.S. closed our borders to other people. But as you know, that is not true. There were restrictions imposed at the ports of entry along the southern border. And there were some travel bans internationally. But not only do tens of thousands of people fly into the United States from around the world every single week, but the border restrictions at the ports of entry really only ever limited travel to about 50% of what it was pre-pandemic. And that number's been climbing. It's now above 60% of what it was pre-pandemic. So Every single day right now at the US-Mexico border, 300,000 people cross the border from Mexico into the United States. Every single day.
Without testing or random testing or
zero testing, have never done any temperature checks. They've never done any tests. If you are a US citizen right now, dual citizen, you can go to Mexico to go shopping, see your family, come back to the United States, no problem. If you're an expat, an immigrant who lives in Mexico, you can just come back to the United States whenever you feel like it. Absolutely no restrictions whatsoever. And of course, truck traffic has continued because commerce must flow. And as a result, this means that every single day, more people cross the border from Mexico into the United States than an entire month's worth of apprehensions of undocumented immigrants. So more people legally cross from Mexico into the United States in a day than an entire month worth of undocumented immigrants.
Right.
And so the idea that somehow undocumented immigrants pose this unique COVID threat, there are literally no COVID mitigation measures in place at the southern border other than a restriction on non-essential travel. But they have defined essential travel such that the re-entry of a U.S. citizen is inherently deemed to be essential. And any travel for business purposes is basically deemed essential as well. So all truck travel is essential. All travel from Cancun back to the U.S. is deemed essential.
Well, yeah.
I mean, what about permanent residents?
I would have to double check. I don't remember the exact rules. And to be clear, these restrictions have caused major economic damage on the border because cutting border traffic by 40 to 50% really does sort of hurt binational communities. And so, ironically, the border towns have been saying for months, way even before Biden took office, lift these border restrictions. They're killing us. Our towns are dying. No one's coming. Economically, all of that cross-border traffic that used to pour money into our towns is gone, or half of that is gone. And we're struggling here. And yet both the Trump and the Biden administrations have said, we're going to keep these restrictions in place for now.
Yeah. I mean, I do know permanent residents do travel freely through airports. And I have clients who have advanced parole or permission to travel that go back and forth freely. So this is really only related to the land entries.
Yeah, these are just the restrictions on the land ports of entries. For the airports, as long as you don't fall in one of the countries with a 14-day travel ban, where you weren't in that country in the last 14 days, you can come in. That's literally it.
The air in the airplane kills COVID.
Right. The virus can't survive the elevation of a standard commercial airline.
Yeah. So it's like half the world, basically. If you want to fly to the United States, you can. And we've kept in place weirdly, travel bans from China, supposedly, even though China says that they have zero COVID cases, even though there's a lot of skepticism about whether that's accurate. The point is there's a lot of countries with higher rates of COVID infection than some of the countries that are currently on our list of COVID banned countries. And yet we haven't put travel bans on them. And so a lot of this stuff is security theater, but it has real world impact.
Right.
The idea then that migrants are coming across the border and spreading COVID is like xenophobic nonsense.
Right. Well, I'm just thinking about the average Fox viewer who, on the one hand, COVID's not even real. But on the other hand, when the Mexicans bring it, it's a big
COVID.
deal.
It is a minor deal. It's just the flu. You don't need to take any precautions unless a migrant has it, in which case burn them with fire.
No, the problem
it's almost
would be,
like it's not about COVID.
It's almost like that. The problem would be if a bunch of vaccinated Mexicans came over, because I don't know if you've heard this, but the people who've been vaccinated shed, first of all, they're magnetic. And then on top of that, they shed a certain kind of vaccine cell, proton, that makes women infertile. And it makes
the new conspiracy theory they want to shed here, that I want to get out there in the internet is, in some cases, there have been vaccination clinics and migrant shelters in the Mexican side of the border. And the new theory that I'm proposing on the basis of this is that if they get enough vaccinated migrants and they bring them up to the wall, it's going to pull the wall down with their magnetism. And that's what's really going to open the border.
Yeah. You know what? It should have been made out of wood.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. This infertile thing, though, might be true because me and my wife are both vaccinated. She's not pregnant.
Well,
yeah. I mean,
have to do with something else.
Yeah, that might have something. Before we go, I want to talk about this new BIA case that came out yesterday. Have you seen it, Stephen?
Yes, I have.
Oh. Well, I know, Aaron, I know you pay attention to this stuff.
I'm not a strong reader.
Yeah. So there's this new presidential BIA case, and let me lay out the facts. This was in Cleveland, Ohio, immigration court. A lady who was applying because she was afraid to go back to her country on the fear that she'd be persecuted and tortured, had a hearing set for 8:30 in the morning. She got caught in traffic, a really, really bad snowstorm, really bad traffic. It made the news. It was really bad. And she got to court at 9:10. She had hired a driver to make sure she got to court on time, but due to the traffic and the big snowstorm, she didn't get to court until 9:10. The judge ordered her deported, essentially saying, you're 40 minutes late, go back and die, I don't care. So she did a motion to reopen. She put all this evidence about the snowstorm, about the traffic, a lot of evidence, and the judge said, I don't care. He denies it. So the BIA has to make a precedential decision to basically tell immigration judges, you know what, if it's a really bad snowstorm and there's really bad traffic and people are a little bit late, give them a little bit of a break.
Right.
And it's hilarious that it even had to be like a presidential decision. Like the BIA issues decisions all the time
that are unpublished, right?
And they're not published or anything, but you can access them and read them. So instead of just like overturning this judge and reopening the case, which is the right thing to do,
they could have done like, in one sentence.
You know what? We better make sure like immigration judges know this. That's kind of where we're at with, you know, a lot of the immigration judges, that they have to publish this decision just so to make sure they know. But imagine what a human being this judge is, who's going to order someone deported to a country where they could be persecuted and tortured because they're a little bit late based on something they could probably see right out their window.
Yeah, I was going to say, we have snowstorms quite often. There's a mountain range between Yakima, where I work, and Seattle Immigration Court. I've been lucky with the judges in Seattle. You know, when the pass is closed, there's cameras that you can see online. It's not like a mystery, right? This isn't 1830. The pass is either closed or it's really dangerous up there. And I've been able to call usually the day of a hearing and just say, like, we're not going to be able to make it over. And the judge will typically continue it. So we've been lucky to avoid that because the people working in Seattle aren't moral monsters. Apparently. I mean, you know, most of the time. Shout out to Seattle Immigration Court. Yeah, so this is just crazy. And it's crazy too when you think about what's at stake in an asylum claim. In an asylum claim, you're saying, like, I might be murdered. There's at least a 10% chance that I will be murdered or persecuted. And it's not like some Social Security claim, not to downplay the importance of something like that. But to throw out the whole case because somebody was caught in a snowstorm traffic jam it's insane. And you're right. Like, the fact that they had to publish this means that it was happening enough, I think, that they had to set the record straight, which is good. Do you think this is a function of the new administration, or do you think that we would have gotten the same decision under the Trump administration?
I mean, if you see the unpublished cases, you see a lot of unpublished cases that have been overturned, or, you know, that would have the same type of rulings. I'm not too sure if it's a function of, I didn't even notice who wrote the decision. And I don't know anything about the immigration judge who made the ruling. So I can't say, oh, that was a Trump judge or whatnot, because trust me, there were a lot of judges before Trump became president. You know, he didn't appoint all the judges, appointed a few of them, but I don't know. But
yeah,
the fact that they have to say it is something.
The fact also that they're basically building off of 20 years of precedent of judges doing this is just a sign of this is like nothing new.
Exactly.
Of course, I read a bunch of these cases because the council put out a practice advisory on continuances and motions to reopen. And so had to do a lot of case research into these things. And there are a depressingly large number of court cases about overturning or somehow addressing a person who showed up half an hour late to court, and the judge didn't even wait to the end of the hearing, just said, wow, you didn't show up exactly now, I'm going to order you deported, you know, because as you know, master calendar hearings often take several hours, and a good judge will, if they call somebody and see that they're not there, just hold it over till the end of the hearing and then wait to see if that person showed up. Maybe they were in the bathroom, maybe they're stuck in the security line, and a bad judge orders them deported immediately and doesn't even wait till the end of the hearing. I mean, like, This is a system that it's really screwed up that that's possible. But if you think about it, it's a system that allows an individual judge to decide, I don't want to wait. That doesn't even require a judge to wait until the end of the hearing and give someone a second chance to show up. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, there are some federal circuits now in the Third Circuit, they have to wait. I remember a long time ago in Miami, when I first started practicing, me and my client, we went in, we checked in for the master calendar hearing, and I went up to the clerk and I had written down the wrong A number. And the guy's like, oh, no, this is with another judge who's on a different floor. Me and the client, we walked out, we went to the other courtroom, and there was no one there. And I'm like, what is this? And so I check it and I'm like, oh, I had the wrong A number. So we go back to court. I'm gone for like 5 minutes. And I had talked to the judge. Like I had went in and the judge saw me and he's like, oh, you got the wrong, he kind of made fun of me and whatnot. And I came back in 5 minutes later and I checked in and the clerk goes, yeah, we just called your case. He's been ordered removed. And so I thought he was joking. Like, honestly. And then the judge kind of stopped what he was doing and he asked what was going on. And the clerk explained, he goes, yeah, you weren't here, so I ordered him removed. And I'm like, but we were here. We've only been gone for a few minutes. He's like, yeah, but I called your case. Just file a motion to reopen.
Oh, my God.
And I'm like, what? Yeah. And I was new. Like, I was, within a few months of just practicing. So me and my client went out. I mean, it worked in his favor. He got a couple more years due to delay, but he didn't really have anything.
Unbelievable.
But that's hilarious because that shows you how completely screwed up the entire system is, because basically that judge being, I don't know what, just bureaucratic, just deciding to be kind of obstructionist or whatever, the letter of the law. I don't know how you want to describe that judicial behavior.
Well, he didn't want to be inconvenienced to open the record again.
Yeah. So that judge who doesn't want to spend 90 seconds or whatever, 2 minutes, or even a judge that didn't want to connect the name to a face, ended up creating dozens of hours of additional work for multiple people at a cost to the government, not insignificant, and allowed somebody who had no options for relief to remain in the country for years because he didn't want to take 90 seconds to correct his obvious mistake. Welcome to immigration.
We were actually taking voluntary departure that time.
Are you serious?
It was like a year or two later. We had another hearing, and the guy, he was from Tampa. He's like, well, what's going to happen? I told him, he's like, why am I going to drive 2 hours for that? I'm like, well, that's a good point. And so I went there and the judge was like, where is he? And he's going over the history. And I'm like, yeah, he just decided not to come.
That's so
And the
funny.
judge is like, okay. But anyways, this case that we were talking about from the Board of Immigration Appeals from Cleveland, this woman, I can just imagine how panicked she must have been sitting in that car, sitting in traffic. And she had gone to every other court hearing. She had multiple court hearings beforehand. It sounds like she was being very diligent. And how panicked she must have been only to get there and have the judge say no. And probably the judge probably had about 3 other cases on his docket for that morning, the way they jammed stuff in. But yeah, the Board of Immigration Appeals made the right choice, but it's just amazing that they actually had to come to that.
I had a guy in December who reached out to me right before his first hearing, and I didn't have time to, enter my appearance or become his attorney, but he was down in Imperial, California, and he was there for his hearing, but he was having COVID symptoms. This is in December, where things were pretty hot. And so I called the court and I said, look, I'm not his attorney yet. And I understand that you probably can't even talk to me about this case, but he has COVID symptoms. He's in Imperial, California. He's ready to go to court tomorrow, but I'm telling you, he's symptomatic. And so do you want him to show up? So the clerk went, talked to the judge, and she came back and said, the judge says, tell him not to come. The case will be reset. Okay, great. And of course, 3 days later, he gets a removal order because he didn't go. So I called the clerk again and was like, well, I talked to you, and is it possible to the judge should remember this conversation. It didn't happen that long ago. Can you guys just sua sponte reopen the case? Oh no, you've got to file a motion, which we did, but it's still pending. It's been 7 months. The judge hasn't decided, hasn't ruled on it. So yeah, I mean, it's just, this stuff happens all the time. It's really disturbing.
1.3 million people in immigration court. And I practiced for far less than both of you for only 2 years. And even I have my own share of these like, judge, what the heck are you doing stories. Mm-hmm. And you're right. For these people who don't have lawyers, just imagine the fear that woman had and that she had to jump through these hoops. And thankfully, she found a lawyer and the lawyer was able to file I don't know if she had a lawyer in the underlying hearing. She may have. That's not mentioned. But she had a lawyer at least to be able to file an appeal and so was able to get this overturned. But the fact that the judge wouldn't even grant a motion to reopen and the fact that this had to go up to an appeal, this woman will have spent an additional probably 4 to 5 years to get her asylum case heard. You know, right. Even just to get in front of the judge, this is a 4 to 5 year delay just to get her case heard. And there are people who would say, really, what we need to do is just have more of these judges issuing these rapid orders without sufficient time and rush these cases through the system. And, you know, when you rush cases through the system, you get this. You get 4 to 5 years of additional delay because someone couldn't bother to give somebody a minor, tiny little break.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really convinced that, you know, the clerks are always, you know, bogged down. They're so busy, but then they're returning 3-page motions because they're not hole punched. Whereas the first time I filed a Ninth Circuit brief, I hired somebody to help me because I didn't know what I was doing. And I had like 14 errors because my font size was wrong. The font size of my footnotes was wrong. Like they have all these rules that I didn't know about. And rather than like, you know, reject the thing and then make me file a motion or whatever, the clerk just emailed me. I was like, hey, can you fix this stuff? And, you know, we'll get it submitted. And it's such a stark contrast to see how the circuit courts are run in a way that's efficient, that's, you know, fair to the petitioners, but also efficient in moving the cases along compared to the way the immigration courts just cling to these sort of black letter rules. Anyways, Aaron, it was great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Hope you guys have a great 4th of July weekend.
You too.
You too.
Go America.
Freedom.